Today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating: the stories our bodies tell without ever saying a word. Yeah, it's this physical, unspoken language that kind of holds the keys to our experiences, and we're about to figure out how to decode it.
So let's just make this real for a second. Have you ever gotten some shocking news and you literally feel your jaw clench shut? Or, that wave of anxiety that tightens your chest so much it's hard to take a breath? Maybe it's just your shoulders creeping up toward your ears whenever you're feeling the pressure. Well, it turns out those physical reactions are way more than just passing feelings. They're actually a pretty profound form of communication, a story your body is trying to tell you about what it's been through. But what happens when that story, that whole physical response, gets interrupted and just gets stuck on a loop? So, how does this even work? Well, our bodies create this kind of protective shield. It's a phenomenon called bracing. We're going to dig into what that is, and then we'll look at how these tiny, really specific movements called interweaves can help release it.
Okay, so what in the world is bracing? The best way to think about it is like a circuit breaker in your nervous system. When something shocking or overwhelming happens, bam, the body tenses up to protect itself. But here's the problem. The event passes, but that tension, that single frozen moment, can stay trapped inside us.
And bracing isn't just one single thing. As you can see here, it shows up in a ton of different ways, from being physically rigid to literally blocking yourself from feeling an emotion. For today, we're going to focus on two key ones: bracing as part of shock and bracing against emotion, because they are absolutely central to the story we're about to get into.
All right, so if bracing is the lock, then interweaves are the key. And we're not talking about big, dramatic movements here. These are tiny, precise, little adjustments guided by a therapist. Just imagine gently jiggling a key in a really stuck lock until you hear that click. The mechanism lets go, and the story can finally move forward.
And this idea of using these subtle little movements to create big change, it's not actually new. Over 100 years ago, this pioneer in body awareness named F.M. Alexander wrote about finding ways for complicated conditions to become less and less complicated. And that is exactly what interweaves are trying to do. So how does this play out in a real session? Well, it's kind of like a three-step dance. First, the therapist just watches. They're looking for that subtle, involuntary tension. Second, they'll suggest a very specific micro movement, and sometimes they'll even ask you to increase the tension a little just to make the body aware of what it's doing. And finally, they both just notice. They pay attention to what happens physically and emotionally as that block starts to let go. Now, this all sounds pretty fascinating in theory, but what does it actually look like? Let's step into a real session with a woman named Philippa, and you can see for yourself how her body unlocked a memory that her conscious mind couldn't even recall. So the session kicks off after Philippa hears someone just mention the practice of tightly wrapping up a baby, and her reaction is instant and completely physical. She said she felt heat waves shooting through her. This wasn't a thought, this was a deep, gut-level response from her body. And that trigger, as it turns out, connected all the way back to her own infancy. Her mom and grandma used to proudly tell her how they wrapped her up super tight, for her own good. But what that left behind was this profound, pre-verbal body memory of being physically trapped and totally helpless. And as she started to connect with this memory, her body began speaking that unspoken language loud and clear. There was tension between her eyebrows, her vision went blurry, she got chills down her legs, her hips started contracting on their own. This wasn't random, this was the physical echo of how she felt as a baby. And here it is. Here comes the interweave. Now notice what the therapist doesn't say. He doesn't say relax. Instead, he gives this totally counterintuitive instruction: lift your shoulders up and forward and slump. He's asking her body to do the exact opposite of the rigid, braced posture it was locked into. So this is the crucial moment. Philippa tells him it's hard to do that. And that difficulty, right there, was the confirmation. It was proof that her body was involuntarily locked in the opposite pattern. And the second she managed to do the movement, the shivers that were running up and down her body just stopped. Completely. Her own words really capture that shift perfectly. She went from being, as she put it, frozen solid, a state where she couldn't even tell what she was feeling, to suddenly feeling softer. And most importantly, she said it was easier to breathe. that physical lock was starting to release. I mean, this slide just lays it all out. Look at this transformation. It's night and day. Frozen solid becomes a softer body. Blurry vision becomes a feeling of being grounded in her feet. The cold and chills become warmth. The contracting hips become a freedom to move. And difficulty breathing turns into surprise and even joy. This wasn't just a change in her thinking, it was a total physical release. And her final thought here just says it all. Releasing that brace, a brace that had been there for decades, it allowed for a completely new way of being, feeling bigger, grounded, warm, and free. A story that had been stuck for a lifetime was finally allowed to finish. Philippa's story is just wow. It's so powerful. But what's the big takeaway here for all of us? Let's bring this back to our own day-to-day lives. The central idea is really this. Our bodies are like living archives. They hold the stories, the traumas, the joys that our conscious minds might have totally forgotten about or just can't find the words for. And what that suggests is that deep healing isn't always just about talking things through. It can also be a physical process of listening and letting go. So the first key takeaway is simple. You are one single integrated system. So next time you feel that familiar tension in your neck or that knot forming in your stomach, just pause and consider this. Maybe it's not random. Maybe it's not just stress. What if it's a meaningful signal, a little piece of an old story your body is still holding on to? And that really leaves us with one last kind of provocative thought. If you were to quiet your mind for just a second and really listen to the physical sensations inside you right now, what unspoken story might your body be trying to tell you?